welcome everybody and good morning. I know many of you certainly that are on here, so it's great to see you and thanks for taking the time out of your day. I know it's a busy time. My name is Stephanie Puchikowski, for those of you that don't know me, Director of Admissions here at Niagara. I've been here for a really long time and probably hit one of your high schools at once or twice between my career here and now recruiting as many places that I've been. So, but really important timing, especially with the FAFSA just opening on October 1st. I think those are a great opportunity to kind of go over some things. I'm sure that you also have been seeing our admission staff out on the road. They've been coming to visit your high school, so I'm sure everything's been great in that respect. And please reach out if you need them to return. We like getting into the high schools as much as we possibly can. It's so important. So if you are looking to do that, or please offer anything up in terms of times and availability. We'd love to come back as many times as we can. So it's great. So this is definitely financial aid focused. I just want to touch on a couple things quickly that I think are important for you to know and for you to share with your students. But there's one thing in particular, scholarship, that I would like to mention. The students have definitely, if they're on our mailing list, have been getting this information from us as seniors, any seniors that you might have, encouraging them. So what this is, we did have it last year as well, but it's called the Eagle Experience Scholarship, but we actually made it even easier this year. We eliminated a step. So the students just need to do two things to receive this $5,000 automatic scholarships. That it's broken down over the course of the 4 years. So it's $1,250 each year and automatically added as long as you just do two things. So students just have to visit campus. If they are from a further distance and they can't make it in person, we will be dropping some virtual campus visits with a live counselor and a live tour guide within the next week. So students will be able to register for that, and that will also count towards a visit. So that and an in-person, but we always, we encourage highly if you can make it to campus. It's great because you really never leave disappointed if you haven't been. So so doing that and then getting your application in by Halloween. It doesn't even have to be completed. So we don't need we don't need the recommendation. We don't need the essay. The application itself just simply needs to be submitted and in our system by Halloween. And the students will automatically get that scholarship as long as they do those two things. So it's very simple, easy money. So we highly recommend the students doing that as soon as they can, so get their applications and get things moving. As you know, I'm sure that many of you are familiar with our office and from other offices as well. Your student will have a specific admissions counselor, and I really encourage that relationship because they become their best advocate for application, for scholarships, for all those kinds of things, and just keeping everything on track from the whole process, from the point of inquiry until hopefully they ultimately decide to come to Niagara. So please encourage those relationships with the admissions counselors. That's what we're here for, and we just like to just build on that as much as we possibly can. So if there's ever a situation where maybe a student can't make it to campus for something in particular, or even a virtual visit, they want something just one-on-one, we will accommodate in any way that we can. So just please let us know. So, but on that note, I don't see anyone else in the waiting room either. So I'm going to, oh, here we go. We have someone. I'm going to turn it over to the star of the show here, who our Director of Financial Aid, Katie Kosis, is going to go over kind of some tips and tricks and all the things you need to know in helping your students file the FAFSA. So Katie, do you want to go ahead?
Sure. All right. Good morning, everybody. My name is Katie Kosis. I am the Director of Financial Aid here at Niagara University. What we're going to go over today is kind of a review of the financial aid, the FAFSA process, and also financial aid terms you're going to see a lot when you start to get those award letters with your students, and then go over anything else after that. The presentation I'm going to be giving today is really close to the presentation I give at like high school nights. It's tweaked a little bit, but if you have any questions, if I'm not talking about something that you get asked a lot, please put it in the chat and we'll definitely address it as we go. Stephanie will be keeping an eye on that chat. All right, I'm going to start sharing my screen. Let's see. Okay, Stephanie, you can see my screen. We're good. Okay, perfect. So tips and tricks for your students. I don't know so much about tricks, but definitely some tips for going through the FAFSA process. There's my contact information. If you do have any follow-up questions, it'll be on the last slide as well, just in case you think of anything after the presentation that you didn't get a chance to ask. So our agenda today, FAFSA process review, as I said earlier, key financial aid terms families will see throughout the process, financial aid offers or reward letters, they're called a couple different things, and then of course ask your questions if you have any remaining at the end. So the FAFSA, of course, the free application for federal student assistance is the key driver in receiving most financial aid besides any merit scholarships that might be available to the students from the admissions departments. And in order to apply for the FAFSA, students and parents need to have an FSA ID. So you have to apply for your FSA ID, students and parents do. You can do it within the FAFSA, but we do recommend doing it earlier just so they have it ready to go. There's a verification process involved of matching up the Social Security Administration information. So the student needs their own FSA ID as well as at least one parent. Only one parent needs to sign off on the FAFSA, not both. Both parents can create FSA IDs if they would like to, but only one technically needs to sign off on it. We need, again, one for the parent, one for the student, and they need to use separate email addresses. This is something that doesn't happen as much anymore, but prior to past couple of years, this was definitely an issue that we would see students and parents trying to use that same email address for both parent and student FSA IDs, and it would really mess things up because it has to be attached, to a single email. If parents have to create another one, maybe family shares one, they should create a second one just so that they have this for this purpose. And they can go, they can go to the studentaid.gov/FSA-ID to actually just create them at any time. And then once they have that, they are going to start completing the FAFSA form. So everything is online. There is technically a paper form that you could fill out. That takes about 4 to 6 weeks to process, whereas the online one only takes 3 to 5 days at the most. So definitely if they are able to do it online, which 99% of students and families do complete online, but I know there are some situations where maybe they don't have access to the internet or the computer, and if they're unable to use it at school or at a library, a paper version can work. It just is going to take a lot longer to process. What I'm showing now is the FAFSA on the web worksheet, which was just released last week for the 23-24 year. That's what opened up on October 1st. So again, this is just a guide, paper guide for them to follow that you can print out. We can send it along to you. But it's also on the federal site if you want to, download it. But we can send it along as well for students to follow. So this is just really going over the basic information that students and families will need in order to complete the FAFSA. So it is the student's FAFSA, as I'm sure you all know, but they will most likely need parental information to complete it. They started off by logging in with the student's FSA ID, and then they're going to start filling out the basic student information. So first name, last name, date of birth, social security number, all those things are needed in order to complete the FAFSA. Please, if you're helping your students fill out the FAFSA, please make sure that they are using the correct social security number, that they have received the correct one from their parents, that they don't have a copy of their card, because this is one of the errors we do find often is that, they use maybe a combination of siblings' social security numbers or a parent and a dependent, kind of mix them up a little bit, or they, swap numbers. It's really important for this to be correct so that all the matches with the Social Security Administration and the Department of Ed can happen. It will cause delays later on down the road, even if the FAFSA gets processed, when their loans start to get processed down the road and their Pell Grants. If it's not matching all the information on file, it's going to start erroring out. So it's really important to get those numbers correct. It will ask what the citizenship status of the student is. They do have to be a US citizen or an eligible non-citizen, like a permanent resident, in order to complete the FAFSA form. So they have to fill out that information. And then it's going to ask their marital status. 99% of the time coming out of high school, students will be single, so that's what they would report on that section. It's also going to ask some information about parent 1, parent 2, their highest level of school completed. This is to trigger the first generation information that schools are looking for. So parent 1, what's the highest school that they completed? Parent 2. Please note, it's not mother or father, it's parent 1, parent 2. Students and families need to be consistent with the information they're reporting. So if you decide to go with, mom for parent 1, you have to report mom's information all the way through as parent 1 and not go back and forth between parent 1 and parent 2. So students need to be really careful with that. That's also something we find is an error. And again, only reason they're completing this is just so that it's easier to determine if a student is going to be considered first gen, first one to go to college in their family. And sometimes, you know, there's additional grants potentially that they might be eligible for at the schools. So it's just a way to help identify that. It will then start asking questions about the student's dependency status. So this is to determine whether or not a student has to provide parental information on the FAFSA. Again, most times coming out of high school, students will be considered dependent and will need to provide parental information. So that's, you know, typically the case. But if they're able to say yes to any one of these questions that are up on the screen, then they would be considered an independent student and not have to report parental data. You know, if they're born before January 1st of 2000, which probably most aren't coming out of high school, if they're in foster care, if they're in legal guardianship, they're armed forces. Just note though, that sometimes this is filled out incorrectly. Students or parents actually mistakenly, you know, say the wrong thing. So schools most likely will be following up on this, especially if it's like the legal custody or guardianship or foster care, something along those lines, just to make sure that this is actually accurate and that the student doesn't need to provide parental data. So just know that if you have a student who does, you know, says yes to one of these things, they might be asked for additional paperwork to provide to the schools just to confirm that that is actually correct. But most times students are going to be considered dependent and have to report parental information. So if this is the case, they then have to determine which parents to report. So if the parents are married or unmarried but living together, and we're talking about bio parents, if they're unmarried but living together, they would report both parents' information on the FAFSA form. But if the parents are divorced, then you are going to report whoever the student lives with more than 50% of the time with during the previous 12 months. Now, I know some divorce agreements say that it's 50-50, although there's technically 365 days in a year, so it's really not technically possible. But yes, if your legal agreement says something about 50-50 custody, then you would report, or the student would report, whichever parent provides the more than 50% of this financial support. And this can include, you know, if the student is on your health insurance, that amount would count towards, you know, being financially supported by the parent. So it's up to the families to decide which parent they are going to report. It's kind of on the honor system, of course. You know, schools typically don't follow up unless something looks really off. Based upon the other information maybe they provided, or maybe within a conversation that they have with students, that sometimes can raise some red flags like, okay, you're saying this, but on the FAFSA you reported something else. So but it is really up to the parents and the students to figure out, you know, which category they fall into. Now, in a divorce situation, let's say, you know, you live with mom, you know, parents divorce, you live with mom, but mom is remarried. You are going to report also step parents information on the FAFSA as well. That is a question we get asked a lot. Even if that step parent might not be really contributing per se towards the college education, they still need to be reported on the FAFSA, their income information, asset information as well. Now, I will say, I probably should have said this at the beginning, is that 23-24 is the last year of what we'll call the old way or the current way of having the FAFSA filled out. In 24-25, the FAFSA is changing. They are eliminating a lot of questions. They're changing how they calculate is currently called the EFC, which we'll get to in a second. That is going to be renamed. So there's a lot changing after next year. So we'll probably do another one of these to go through all those changes as it gets a lot closer to next year. But just know that how a lot of these questions are determined and presented will be changing moving forward. Hopefully it'll be easier and quicker for students and parents to fill out, but it's going to be a lot on our end to figure out those changes and how it will affect things, and you know what the best way moving forward will be. But currently, for the students who are helping this year, this is how the FAFSA is filled out. So then once the students and parents figure out which parents' information to report, they would start putting in that information. Again, first name, last name, date of birth, and social security numbers for both parents. So they will need, you know, this is probably something the student cannot do on their own unless they have all that information available, or if they are, you know, sitting with the parent to complete it together. It will start asking information about parents' taxes if they filed taxes in 2021. So for the 23-24 FAFSA, it is based off the 2021 tax year. So they do have to use those completed taxes. One of the things that is available is the data retrieval tool, the IRS data retrieval tool, and this allows families to be able to take the information that's already on file with the IRS and bring it into the FAFSA form. We highly recommend doing this because it does provide accurate information to our offices so that we can put together financial aid offers that are, not just based upon estimates or maybe they kind of guessed what the information might be. So we do highly recommend doing this. I'll get to that slide in a second. But if they don't use the data retrieval tool, they have to put things in manually and have to put in adjusted gross income, income paid, and then also, we'll go on to the next one. But the data retrieval tool is an option, again, that's starting October 1st when the FAFSA opened. There are a couple of instances where you cannot use the data retrieval tool. So if the parents filed married filing separately, it won't let you use it. Unfortunately, it can somehow only find one parent and not two. So they can't use it in those situations. They also can't use it if they've been a victim of identity theft. For security purposes, they can't use it. So those are the two most common reasons why parents or students are unable to use the data retrieval tool. And those cases, you just have to do it manually, which is still fine. But just know that you'd have to do it manually instead of it being transferred over. So this is where I was talking about. So then they also have to put in their wages. So parent one, parent two, again, be consistent with whatever parent you reported, how much they earn. Now, this is from their W-2 forms. Now, there's when you're in the FAFSA and also on the worksheet, it's going to tell you exactly what box to pull from and what line to pull from your taxes, from your W-2 forms. So it's really important. It's really helpful, I should say, if students and parents have all this information ready to go before they actually sit down to complete the FAFSA. Because I know it can get very frustrating when you go to start the FAFSA and you're starting to go through all these questions and it's asking you and you're like, well, I don't have any of these forms with me. So and I know it's hard for, to get students to get their parents' information, but if they are able to, that it really does help, try to get all this done in one sitting. It will then go on to ask more specific questions. If in the parent's household in either 21 or the current year 22, they received SSI or Medicaid, free reduced school lunch, SNAP benefits, any one of those things, they would just say yes if they did receive one of those. One of the questions I do get asked a lot at presentations is for the free and reduced lunch. So I know some schools, especially during COVID, technically the entire school district was eligible for the free reduced lunch, but that's not the case how it is on the FAFSA. It still has to go off of if the family individually would be eligible for free reduced lunch, then they can say yes. Otherwise, they should not click that box, even though the school technically was eligible. It still has to go off of if the family met those guidelines. It will then go into some more questions based off of the tax information. Did they pay any child support? Did they receive any child support? Did they have any money towards their 401k or their pension funds during the previous year? And that's off their W-2 form. You're not reporting the total amount that's in the pension funds. That's not looked at all. It's just that they were, put any money towards it during the 2021 year. So if they check any one of these boxes, you will have to report the amount. Unlike before, if you're just checking that you received free or reduced lunch, with these questions down below, if you say yes to one of them, you do have to put in the actual amount. So they will need to get those that information as well from their taxes or the W-2 forms, whichever might be the case. Then it will start going into, now there's a lot of skip logic involved in the FAFSA. That's the nice thing about the online version, is that depending upon how you answer, one question or whatever, you might not have to answer every other single question. And one of those skip logic is the asset question. So based upon how many people they reported as being in the household, how many in college, what their AGI was, they may or may not have to report assets. But if they do have to report assets, then this is the information they have to provide. So the asset questions are all based off of the current year as of the day they're filing the FAFSA. So as of the day you're filing the FAFSA, what is the amount in the cash savings and checking accounts? What's the net worth of their other investments? Or if they have a business or investment firm, what's the net worth of that? So net worth, of course, means the current value as of today, minus any debts related to those same investments and business things. So this is a question that I got asked a lot this year during my presentations of what is investment and what would not be considered. So I do go into a little bit more detail here of what is included in investments. It does include real estate, not the home that they're living in, but they have like a second home or a vacation property or a rental property, trust funds, money market funds, CDs, stocks, bonds, those types of things are considered investments, and they would have to report the net worth. Again, depending upon your student population, there might not be a lot of investments, and then other school districts might have a lot of families who fall into this category. So it is a very individually based question that students aren't probably going to know the answers of these, so parents would have to be involved in determining those things. It does also include 529 plans or other education plans like those. So it is something that does technically have to be reported on the FAFSA, but it does depend on who's the owner of the 529 plan. So if the student or the parent is considered the owner, then those assets go underneath the parental asset information. It would not be reported in the student section. It goes under the parent section. But let's say a grandparent is the owner of it, then it doesn't get reported. So it's just if the student or the parent themselves are considered the owners of the education plan, would the assets get reported under the parental information. Investments don't include, again, the home you live in, the value of life insurance, ABLE accounts, retirement plans. None of those amounts are reported on the FAFSA. So sometimes I think families get a little confused with this, and their assets are, really quite high because they're reporting their retirement funds, and that's not the case. You should not put the complete value of, health insurance, or sorry, of your retirement plans onto the FAFSA. And then if you have a business, pretty much if you should not report information under this section if you own your family owns and controls more than 50% of the business and you have 100 or fewer. So if that if you meet that description there, you would not report the business asset information. It's just if you have less than that or more than that, I should say. Okay, so after the students and parents get through that section, it then flips back over to the student section, and all those same questions they just answered for the parent, they're now going to answer for the student. Now, a good portion of the time, students don't have taxes, or, it's not as much information they have to report, but they still would have to respond to these questions. Did they file a tax return? If they did, they can use the data retrieval tool as well, unless they've been a victim of identity theft, I suppose. Their adjusted gross income, their taxes paid, how much did they earn in 2021? Did they receive, free or reduced lunch? So any one of those questions, all the same things that the parents already previously answered, the students will now answer for their own. And again, they're going to be asked these questions as well. Most times, again, they probably aren't going to say yes to any of them. And again, they might be asked about their assets as well. So now that they have all that information gathered, hopefully, they would go directly onto studentaid.gov to complete the FAFSA. If you've never been there before, they go to start here. They've been there before, they can go to log in. They've already kind of created an account and started it. And then once they do complete the FAFSA form, after all that is done, they will get a student aid report or a SAR report. And this will go to whatever, typically it'll go to whatever email address was provided on the FAFSA form. And it will just be really, this is an example of like the paper version, but again, it's an emailed copy of all the questions on the FAFSA and all the responses. So we do encourage families to look over that SAR report to see if there was any mistakes made. Sometimes extra zeros are put in for assets. Don't use decimals. That's another tip. Don't use decimals. The FAFSA does not like decimals because sometimes that's how 10,000 becomes, like 100,000 sometimes. So make sure that, you're not using those decimals. They should review this to make sure all the information is correct. If something's wrong, that's okay. They can, go back into the FAFSA and make a correction. That's not a problem. They do have to wait a couple of days for it to process, but they shouldn't be getting the SAR report until the FAFSA has been processed. A couple of things to look at on this of note is it will give you the expected family contribution, the EFC. In this case, it's a 0. It could be 10,000, 20,000. It's going to be different for each student based upon all the information they put in. If you see a little asterisk next to it, like in this example, that means that the student has been selected for the verification process and that they will most likely have to provide additional documentation to the school so the schools can confirm all the information that was put onto the FAFSA form. the amount of students that are selected for verification each year has dropped. It used to be about 30%. Now it's down to about like 15, 18%. So it is going down. And currently for this current year, 22-23, and the previous year, because of COVID, verification requirements were waived. But for as of right now, they are still in place for 23-24. So expect that students might have to provide some additional documentation for that. And if they have a C code, that's not good. A C code means that something's wrong, something couldn't be confirmed. They'll need some additional follow-up information. Typically, the schools will follow up with the students, and then FAFSA will send them an email. But just know if you see a C code on a SAR report, then something needs to be corrected. So while the student is in the FAFSA, they can list up to 10 schools at a time. If a student is applying to more than 10 schools, that's perfectly fine. What they'll have to do, list their top 10 schools, submit the FAFSA, wait about, I say give it a week to process fully, go back in, take some schools off, add some other schools on, but it's really important that you do keep track of the schools that they're taking off and putting back on. The student needs to keep track of that, because if they end up going to a school that they took off of the FAFSA, that school is no longer receiving any of potentially important updates. So it's really important to keep track of who the student is adding and who they're taking off. It is processed electronically. Each school will receive it in about 3 to 5 business days, depending upon, the volume of the timing. Like right now, it's taking a little bit longer to get to us because everybody's filling out their FAFSA right now. But it really just depends on the time of the year. But yeah, 3 to 5 days is typically how long it takes for us to get it. Once we do receive that FAFSA, we will look to see if the student is accepted. Before we can put together a financial aid offer, the student has to be accepted at the school. And then once that happens, we will match it up and start putting together a financial aid offer for the student. Now, students and families will see a range of when these offer letters start going out. So some schools start as early as November. At Niagara, we start sending ours out in January. Other schools are March, April. It really depends upon the school. Kind of depends maybe on what, location they're in, like of the country. Some are earlier, some are later. It really just depends. So they're going to see a wide range. They shouldn't panic if they get a couple in November or December and then they don't hear anything, from other schools until January, February. It's just each school has their own time frame. They're more than welcome to contact the schools that they're looking at to ask what their timeline is. Okay. Any questions, Stephanie, on any of that before we kind of get into financial aid terms?
No, and there's nothing in the chat as of yet either, so you're good to go. Okay, so now that we kind of went over the FAFSA stuff, again, if you have any questions, throw them in the chat. If there's anything I didn't answer that you get asked a lot, help assisting students, let me know. Be happy to answer that or look into it. But then I want to go over some of the terms families are going to see along the process and what they mean. Just because, us in the financial aid profession, we know these in and out and what they mean, and they all make sense to us. It does not mean that parents and families who have no idea what's going on with financial aid, if it's their first, time through, does not mean that they know what these things mean. So cost of attendance, or the COA, this is really the budget. It's another word for a budget. It is comprised of 2 things, the direct cost and the indirect cost. So you have your direct costs. Those are things like tuition and fees, room and board if they're living on campus, maybe books and supplies, things that are charged directly to the student. They will see that on their bill. And then you have indirect cost, transportation, personal, room and board if they're not living on campus, books and supplies, things that we know that they will encounter throughout the year expense-wise, but they will never see those charges on their account. But we know that they will encounter them at some point. So those 2 things combine to create their cost of attendance. This is going to vary widely from school to school. Each school is different. A community school versus Niagara versus Harvard have very different costs, right? So this is going to be different for each student. Even at the same school, if you're a commuter versus if you're living on campus, those are 2 different budgets as well. So it can really differ from school to school, from student to student, depending upon what their situation is. But this is what those things comprise the cost of attendance. And by regulation, financial aid offices cannot award students more aid that's above and beyond the cost of attendance. So that cost of attendance is really their limit to what aid, including loans, can be offered to the student. So then you have your expected family contribution, or the EFC. Now, this is the thing, one of the things that will be changing when the FAFSA is redesigned after this year, and that will be turning into an SAI, or the Student Aid Index.
So the terminology will be changing moving forward, but for this year, it's still the EFC. It is the amount the government expects that a family can reasonably be expected to contribute based upon all the information they put in on the FAFSA. It goes through their formula and pops out this EFC number. It does stay the same regardless of the college you're going to. It's the parent contribution and the student contribution. Now, what I tell parents and families and students is that just because, like in the example we showed, it was a 0 EFC, just because it says 0 does not mean that you're not going to owe anything for school. It really is just a standard way for schools to be able to put together financial aid offers. Now, in some instances, that might very well be the case. If you're going to maybe a state school and you have the 0 EFC, you're eligible for, full Pell. If you're a New York State resident, maybe you're eligible for full TAP. That might cover all your charges and you might not have any balance, and that's great. But especially for private schools, most of the time that's not going to be the case, and students will still owe a balance. So I think it's really important for them to understand that just because you have a low EFC does not necessarily line up with what the balance is going to be. Again, it's really just a way for schools to be able to put together financial aid packages and offers to students on a fair basis. So then you get into financial needs. So you have your cost of attendance, that's that budget, minus the EFC from the FAFSA, and that remaining number is financial need. And that means schools can package students with need-based aid, which we'll get into in a little bit, up to that amount. So again, going to be different for each student based upon what their cost of attendance is and their financial contribution. So then you get into the different types of financial aid. You have your scholarships, your grants. Those are free money, right? Students and parents want those, don't have to pay those back in most cases. Scholarships more so are typically like the merit scholarships you receive from the admissions office based upon what you've done in high school or other places. Grants, those are more often associated with like having financial need, like the Pell Grant, TAP Grant, which we'll get into in a little bit. Things that are going to be based upon that FAFSA calculation and having that financial need. Again, those two things, free money, don't have to pay those back. The next thing is loans. Now, technically the FAFSA is your application for federal student aid, including federal loans. These loans are going to be in the student's name. They don't have to accept them if they don't want to, but they will be offered them just because we have to do that because they filed a FAFSA form. They are loans. They do have to be repaid back after graduation or after the student stops attending. And then the last thing would be employment. This could be the federal work-study program through the federal government, which is based upon having financial need, or maybe some schools have just normal student employment that's through the school, and you don't have to have financial need for that. But of course, employment, you have to work to either earn a paycheck or to have some of that money go towards your account. So first two things free, don't have to pay back. Third one, loans, have to pay back after graduation, and employment, you're working for it as you go along. So the sources of financial aid that students will see, federal government, probably the largest source, of course, based upon that FAFSA form. The states, so if they're a New York State resident attending a New York State school, they can't, be a New York State resident going to Pennsylvania for school. That money won't travel with them. They have to be attending a New York State school. They might be eligible for some aid from the state. We'll get into that in a little bit. Colleges and universities themselves, more so I'm thinking like private schools with their merit scholarships and their endowments. Private sources, the last three are really kind of all lumped together. Private sources, civic organizations, employers, there's community foundations. I know there's one in Greater Buffalo, there's one in Syracuse. Those places offer a wide variety of scholarships that students can apply to. I'm sure at your local districts, there's scholarships that they can apply to, some that are specific towards your school, towards the county that you live in, and employers. If the student works at Wegmans, I know there's scholarships. So there's a lot of different things, and these are things that students have to look for on their own. They should start searching for that now. I know some applications don't typically open up until winter, early spring, and they're due mid-late spring, but they can start researching those now to to start getting ready. They might have to write an essay. I'm sure you're all used to telling students to really work on those. We always say here, the amount of students that inquire about scholarships is way up here, and the amount that actually apply is way down here. It's just a fact of life, unfortunately, no matter what we do to try to get students to apply for those. It is like pulling teeth sometimes, but it really does help. $500, that pays for books. I've seen students receive up to $5,000 from the community foundation. It really just depends. All these things can help. So it is, to their benefit to really start. And there's national things like fastweb.com, scholarships.com, and those are good too, good resources, but students are competing, with everyone in the nation for those. I always suggest to, if you have a choice, really focus on the local ones because you have a better chance of receiving one of those. Okay, the federal government, as I said earlier, largest source of financial aid. Most of the aid awarded from the federal government based upon the FAFSA form is awarded based upon having that financial need, definition that we talked about. They do have to, it is an annual process. They do have to apply for it every single year. Every October 1st, the FAFSA will open up and they can start completing it. For freshman students, we recommend having it in by Thanksgiving. That gives us plenty of time to start putting together financial aid offers. Returning students, they don't, again, each school is different, but they typically don't have to do it on October 1st. Again, if they do it by Thanksgiving, by Christmas, they're perfectly fine with that. Some of the common federal aid programs you will see on the offer letters. The Pell Grant's probably the most well-known, the largest one of everything right now. Currently, it is based upon what the EFC is. It's about $6,000 EFC cutoff and below. They should be eligible for at least some amount of Pell Grant. That is changing after this year, how they calculate that. So again, we'll get into more detail as that time comes, as we're still kind of figuring it out ourselves. The Teach Grant, if they're thinking of going into the education field, they should contact their schools about more information about that. Opportunity Grant, you do have to be eligible for the Pell Grant in order to receive this award. But unlike the Pell Grant, where no matter when you apply or what, you get it, it's an entitlement, you get it regardless. The Opportunity Grant, each schools have a limited amount of this, so you might see it in a financial aid package or you might not. It just depends on how much they have to offer. Federal Work Study, again, you do have to have a financial need to be offered the Federal Work Study program, again, based off of that calculation. Each school is different. Here at Niagara, school students work between 10 to 12 hours a week, and then they can either have a paycheck every couple of weeks or they can put some of that money towards their balance. And then you also have your loans. So you have your subsidized and unsubsidized loans. Subsidized means the government pays the interest on the loan while the student is in school, and they don't have any interest accruing, of course. Again, this one is a need-based loan, so you have to have financial need in that calculation in order to be eligible for this. And the other one is the unsubsidized loan. That's where the government does not pay the interest on the loan while the student is in school, so interest is accruing. The max for a freshman student, a combination between the two, is $5,500 for the year as a freshman. Goes up another $1,000 for their sophomore year and another $1,000 after that for their junior and senior years. So again, students might see a combination of some of it might be sub, or maybe it's all unsub, again, based upon the financial need in their package. And then plus loans. These are parent loans, they're federal loans in the parent's name. It is something they can apply to, help out with the remaining balance, whatever the family decides is the best case scenario for them. But that is something that the parents would have to use their FSA ID to apply for, to log in that way, and it would be in their name. Okay, moving on to the states. So we're going to talk about New York State specifically, of course. They do have to be a New York State resident, living in New York, of course, for at least a year. Most of the aid from New York State is based upon financial need, like the tuition assistance program, but they do have other, more specific scholarships that are based upon merit, or some very specific. There's like a memorial scholarship, there is the World Trade Center scholarship, so there's some very specific items as well. But the most well-known program is the tuition assistance program, or TAP. There is a specific income cutoff. It is $80,000 combined for a New York State net taxable income between student and parent. So if that is $80,000 or below, then they would be eligible for some amount of TAP grant. There's also the Excelsior program for students who are thinking of going into state schools. This is $125,000 or below for a combined family income. Now, there's a lot of criteria that the students have to meet. They have to complete 30 credits a year in order to stay on track. They have to agree to live or work in New York work or study, I should say, in New York State for as many years as they received the grant. If they don't, it does turn into an interest-free loan. So there's a lot of things students need to take into consideration. Some students, if they already have a 0 EFC, they might already be receiving full tuition between their Pell and their TAP, so they might not need to sign up for this. It is for New York State state schools, it is the amount of tuition minus any TAP and Pell that they've already received. So again, it's something to look into. It is a separate application from the TAP application that typically opens up in April and is due usually in August. So they don't even know if they've been selected until pretty much school starts. So there's a lot of things to look into, but it is something that does, can help, students who are thinking of going to state schools who fall into that income cutoff. It does use information from the FAFSA form. So at the very end of completing the FAFSA, it'll say, congratulations, you've submitted your FAFSA, and there will be like a little link that says, would you like to complete your state application? I recommend saying yes to this, as it does transfer all that information over to the New York State application. There's still some things they have to fill out, but it does save some time. If they don't do it right after the FAFSA, that's okay. I know they might be kind of, they're on a time limit, but they do have to wait for the FAFSA to process. I say give it about a week, and then they can go back directly into the state form at hesc.ny.gov to actually, start their New York State application from scratch and complete it that way. One thing to note is, unlike the FAFSA, where you can list up to 10 schools on the application, on the state application, you only get 1. So it does take the first New York State school that's listed on the FAFSA if you're transferring it that way. If not, you can list only 1. So just be sure that if you are doing the transfer and whatever school is listed, just know that if you don't end up going to that school, the school you are going to won't know that you're getting TAP. It is very easy to fix. Schools can fix it on their end too, but it is important for students to kind of keep track of what school is listed on the TAP application. I talked about private sources earlier. Again, we highly recommend students start researching these now so that they can start applying when that time comes in, late winter, early spring. The last thing I want to touch on that we get asked a lot is for special conditions or appeals. Now, the FAFSA is based off of the 2021 tax year information, so they do have to use that, but a lot has been going on the past couple of years, of course, right? So things could be changed. Maybe they're making less income that they did in 2021. Maybe there's been a separation or divorce or something like that. So if that's the case, they should contact the schools that they're interested in. Now, if they're applying to a lot of schools, I say take the top 3 or 4 because it's a lot of extra work you have to do for each one. But take the top schools that they want to go to, contact their financial aid offices, see what the process is, explain the situation. If it is something where something has changed, a reduction in income, a divorce, separation, something like that, the school will let you know what their process is, so that we call either special circumstances or professional judgment. It's the same thing, that we'll ask for additional documentation, maybe a current pay stub. If it's later in the, after, maybe it's January, we'll ask for 2022 taxes, whatever the case might be, just to show, why there is a need for maybe a potential change in the FAFSA information. And then our goal is to see if, based upon our adjustments, if we're able to reduce the EFC and then thereby, in theory, hopefully increase the financial aid amount that the student is eligible for. Now, in some cases, maybe nothing has changed, and it's really just, I'm looking at everything and I just need some additional funding, and that's okay. We get those all the time. They can contact the schools again that they're interested in. And again, each school might have a different process. Maybe there's a form you fill out, maybe you just send it an email, and you just explain the situation, why you're looking for additional funding. And then the school will, meet and then determine if there's anything additional they can give you. The worst things, schools can say is no. So it doesn't hurt to ask to see what additional money might be out there. And, again, if you're comparing schools, oh, this school, gave me this much, you're only giving me this. Schools might also ask to see a copy of those award offers as well. So just to tell students to kind of keep those all together so that they have that in case a school is asking for it. And the last thing, we can send this out as well to all the attendees. It's part of the booklet that I usually hand out to students and families when I do my presentations. But even if they don't use this, they should use something similar. It is the financial aid award letter or offer letter worksheet. Once they start receiving all those packages in the mail or through their portals, they should start doing this. They should start, okay, school A this is what they're charging me in tuition. This is what their fees are. Are you in any special programs that require extra fees like theater or nursing? Are you living on campus? Are you going to have room and board charges? So they need to put those down, then list out all their different aid that they're being offered, their grants, scholarships, work study loans, all that stuff, and then really get to the bottom of the net price. What is it going to cost me at each school, before loans, after loans? I take all those things into consideration to really make an apples to apples comparison. Because one thing that we get often, especially through the appeal process, the student or family will say, oh, I got like $40,000 from this school, but you're only giving me $20,000. Okay, well, let's take a look. That school's giving you $40,000, but they cost $70,000, versus we're giving you 20, but we only cost 30. So they really have to break it down to see what that exact amount is, because it is a big decision that they're making, for the next 2-4 years of their lives. So it needs to be a financially sound one for their family, that they will be able to, continue to progress in college and be able to, afford it financially. So, okay. That's a lot, I know. Are there any questions? Did I not talk about something you wanted me to talk about? This is the first time we've done this for counselors, so I just want to make sure that we are touching on all the points that you were hoping to get informed on.
There are no questions in the chat too, but I mean, even for myself, Katie, just a wonderful overview, so thank you.
No problem. I do understand it's a lot. It's a lot of information to throw at you at 9 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah. Okay, there's some questions here, I think. Oh, you guys are welcome. Really, it's our pleasure, honestly. For the Teach grant, is that a separate application, Katie?
Yes. So each school is probably a little different in how they work it. But here at Niagara, we have the students would have to they have to fill out like an application with our College of Education, who then forwards it on to me. But then the student on their end also has to complete an agreement to serve an entrance counseling specific to the Teach grant, and that can be found at studentaid.gov.
Here's another, it's an important one. What do you do if a student is on their own under 18? They don't live with or have any contact with their parents?
Sure. So that's a good question. So sometimes all those dependency questions we were going over earlier, sometimes students don't really meet any of them, but they don't have that parental support, or they're in a situation like that. If that's the case, what they would do, they would say no to all those questions. Like they don't meet all those, they can't say yes to any one of those. But then there is this a question, and I forgive me, I don't know exactly where it is, like when it comes after, but there's a question of saying, are you able to provide parental information, or are you unable to? And if you say yes to that, they can click that box. The FAFSA will process through. They don't only put their own information on it. The FAFSA will process through. It will come to us as an invalid FAFSA because it won't have a valid financial contribution on it because there's no parental information. But the schools will know to reach out to the student to ask for updated information. So most likely the schools, after listening to what the student says to see if it's a valid reason for what we can do, we will try to do an override to make that student independent on our end. So it is something that students should probably contact the schools that they're looking into to give them a heads up, say, hey, I completed my FAFSA. I couldn't provide parental information. What else do I need to do? And the schools will, it is a school by school decision. So one school might approve you, another school might not, based upon the information the student is providing. If they have any type of legal documentation, court documentation, any letters from like high school guidance counselors or therapists or anything like that, that would kind of back up what they're trying to support, that is really beneficial.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So this is being recorded and you can absolutely share it, and it will be emailed out as well. And we actually have, just so you guys know, we have a YouTube Niagara University channel that you can go onto, and all of our seminars and webinars are posted on there, even by major and certain things like that. But yes, please share with whatever you like. It's okay to share with parents too, right, Katie? We can share with parents, right?
Oh yeah, I mean, this is pretty much the same thing I give. Yeah, go for it.
Sure, yeah, I agree. If a student receives an outside scholarship, does this change their financial aid?
It depends on, first, of how much the outside private scholarship is. Like, we see some students that get almost full funding, depending upon, especially like Native American students who might get a large amount of funding. So each school is going to be different on this. I mean, we try really hard not to adjust the package, but sometimes we just have to, especially if it puts them over their financial need calculation. If that's the case, again, I'm only speaking from Niagara's point of view. We try to reduce loans first before we touch any of the other aid or work study. Sometimes that's one of the things to go, unfortunately. But we try our best not to touch grants or scholarships that have already been awarded to the student from the school. It's important to see what the details are on the outside private scholarship. Sometimes they say it's specifically for tuition or fees only, and other times it says it can be used for other educational expenses. If it says it can be used for other educational expenses, those are like, you know, the really good ones, because then you might not have to reduce as much of something else.
Okay. And I believe this is another direct question to the other about anyone that might be under 18 with contacting the school. They're asking, will the counselor then send that letter to the school, and should the counselor call the school as well?
So yeah, I mean, you can either send the letter to, you know, you can give it to the student and they can, you know, give it to us or to the schools. It depends. Some schools might have portals, you know, that need to be uploaded. So then, you know, the student should be able to upload that information, and like counselors won't have access to that. If it's a case where like maybe the student is having trouble with something, sure, have the counselor contact the schools. It'd be ideal if the student is also sitting there with you so that we have their permission. It's not so much as with FERPA at the moment because they're not technically like an enrolled student yet, but still just for, you know, we try to maintain that we're allowed to talk to you about information. We can give you general information, but we might not be able to talk to you about specifics unless we have permission from the student.
Thank you very much. There is a note too in the chat. If anyone, someone is sharing when they had an unaccompanied youth, they had a direct representative write a letter to that effect that the student used financial to show that he was okay.
Yeah,
he was independent. Okay.
I think that's what it's called. So yeah, that's a good. If you have that, then that's one of the things we can accept for making them independent.
Okay. And then that's to clarify, a scholarship is best to indicate only to be used as other expenses, quote unquote, not tuition and board. Does that serves them best?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that? I didn't.
Do you want, actually, probably want to, might be best for you to, can you hop in the chat?
Yeah, hang on. Let's see.
Scholarship going towards other expenses. Is that what's best for them, basically?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's yes, if you are, it is most helpful or most beneficial to a student if it says it can be used for other educational expenses like room and board, books, transportation, those types of things, rather than just tuition and fees. Each scholarship company and, you know, organization is different. Some really only want to go towards tuition, and that might be fine, you know, and that, you know, in most cases that's okay. It's just that some students receive so much other aid that's only going towards tuition that if they receive one more thing that's only towards tuition, then we have to reduce something or return something back. So yes, if you are able to say that a scholarship is to be used for other educational expenses or can be, then that is the way to go. But it's, you know, you're not able to control it every time, unfortunately.
Great, thank you, Katie. Anything else? I don't think I missed any. I'm scrolling through. I think I got them all. But we'll make sure, like I said, the recording gets out. Thank you for the kind words. We're happy to do this. I think that's all. Yeah, great questions though, really, yeah. And I just want to do a little plug too for everybody just quickly before we sign off. Thank you everyone. Please save the date. You'll be getting an invitation shortly for November 4th. Niagara is hosting an on-campus special in-person seminar for school counselors. There's going to be a presentation from our Vice President of Student Affairs, Chris Sheffield, who, as Katie can attest, is wonderful. It's basically kind of how to help your college-bound students, their emotional and social needs, and how to make the best choices for them, and kind of where we stand with that, but just also very general too, kind of more like a service to you as school counselors to help with that. So please keep November 4th in mind. You will get an invitation and also a direct letter from me. So we'd love to have you. So if you're able to mark it down, please do. So, but thank you everyone for joining us today. We'll send out the recording, like I said, and we'll see you all soon.